Yeah. My section is titled When Schools Suck, But Education is Essential, because that kind of sums up, one, the entire essence of this film, in that, like, the system itself is horrible, but educating yourself on, like, how to not be a terrible person is essential. And there's ways in which, like, education in and of itself, like learning things, is essential, but it really is unfortunate that our K-12 system exists as poorly and as, like, honestly, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do, but it's not helping us, essentially. So this film, as we were talking about, it was, like, super on the nose in kind of like the best way possible. In the horrors of, like, what the K-12 system is, I would argue she's, like, talking about both public and private education, as well as, like, the charter school systems or like Catholic schools. And in case you don't know, just, like, as a public service announcement to everyone here, why schools were made. The public school system as it is today was developed both as a means to provide childcare to working parents, as well as a way to train humans to exist inside a place for an extended period of time, specifically around like 8 hours a day. Schools are used as a means to train the workforce because to become like used to never seeing their families, never taking a day off, sitting for extensive periods of time, all things that would like super benefit you if you're working a 9-to-5 job or you're working in
use the restroom.
Yeah, exploitative environments like factories and stuff like that, like warehouses, anywhere that like you really don't get rights in those scenarios. You have to be obedient or you lose your job because ultimately the kind of theme is that you're replaceable. And it's really interesting because I think the real reason why so many kids have ADD and ADHD is because evolutionarily, like we have not progressed to the point where that's okay for our bodies and our minds. And we were not meant to exist this way. So the majority of humans who are used to more like creative and expressive lifestyles are like forced into this sitting and like sedentary lifestyle where you just kind of have to exist in a place for a long time just to survive.
And wasn't it like Ford who like decided on the 8-hour work week? Like that was like hella recent. Like that was industrial age.
It was because
we're gonna have that.
There was a labor shortage and they couldn't segment out the hours. Like you couldn't have one person work the morning shift and one person work the afternoon shift because a lot of people had died. Like that there was a labor shortage. It's almost like that's what's happening again now. So essentially to account for that was to extend the hours of the day so you could have a single person complete that work over a period of time. Like, honestly, what would solve unemployment is if they went back to the previous method, which was to have someone work the morning shift and someone work the afternoon shift and someone work the night shift. And then everyone kind of exists within that shift cycle. And then they have enough time to like do dishes when they're home, see their kids, like general human being quality of life type stuff that does not exist in our current society.
But their work would also benefit in that, like, they would have the energy and the attention. Like, honestly, 8 hours, no one is working 8 hours straight. Like, there are times when you're not doing anything, so it should be, like, less time where you're actually working, and then you move on. You go to the next, like, you do your life.
Well, there would be more investment. There'd be better attention. There'd be more, just, like, quality of life improvements that essentially would make people feel more focused and productive while they're actually at work instead of, like, this kind of endless existence in one space, that you lose a lot of productive hours just because, one, like, lots of people have ADHD or ADD and they don't know it, or they have some sort of neurodivergency. Not like everyone, because there are obviously neurotypical people that are making these kinds of decisions that actively hurt people. But there's lots of people who just exist and can do this. Like it's nothing. But they're actively hurting the people who were not designed to exist this way.
And we really, none of us were. Ultimately.
Yeah, even if you don't have ADD or ADHD, like you don't exist to be this way. Exactly. It hurts everyone ultimately, unless you are of the income bracket that is of the exploitee, the one doing the exploiting instead of the exploited.
Like the principal in K through 12.
Yeah.
The principal song is like, if does your mom know that you're like this? It was like, you just push, like, you abuse everyone because you have power. Like, yeah. That's what the principal song was.
And it's honestly very intentionally done, and I'll get into that kind of like as we go. But schools are, as they exist, an active indoctrination, a training ground, if you will, for capitalism. And ultimately, since it's America, white supremacy, and the patriarchy, because of the rules that they instill upon women. Public schools educate more than 91% of the U.S. population while only receiving 8.4% of the federal budget. The disparity increases further state by state in how funds are allocated between rural and suburban and urban districts. So, according to the Medium's article, The Unspoken Secret of Capitalism Destroying Education, if 8.4% of the budget is accumulated nationwide for education, urban schools, which hold the majority of the country's disinvested and exploited students, are receiving the crumbs of an already stripped federal budget. Public schools pupils enrolled in urban districts receive an average of $2,100 less per pupil than their suburban counterparts, and $4,000 less than students who attend rural remote schools, according to a recent study of EdBuild. And within cities, kids in predominantly white, non-white districts receive less than kids in predominantly white districts, around $1,321 less. If looking at this state by state, and specifically speaking about Pennsylvania, the state that the Ghouls reside in, there's an extensive disinvestment that exists throughout the state that largely targets Black and Latino populations. As a result, the lower wealth school districts have less money to spend on average, and the poorest 20% of schools districts have $7,866 less per student than the wealthiest 20%, a report said. Based on the calculation adjusted to reflect extra costs, based on like in low-income neighborhoods, generally there is more trauma within the population because of being like subjected to this like nationwide disinvestment. Like, it's not even just like from the schools. It extends to food deserts. It extends to housing. It extends to like everything that kind of exists under that bubble, being underfunded in specific areas that are intentional and targeted. According to this report, 428 districts educating 86% of Pennsylvania's public school students lacked adequate funding from 2018 to 19, with a shortfall of $4.6 billion.
Billion.
Yeah. Pennsylvania is not the worst, but it's it's pretty horrifying in how they distribute funding. So they're largely taxed locally instead of federally. So if you don't have if you have high local taxes, you can supplement what is not provided federally. But if that isn't the case, if you live in Philadelphia, for example, where large businesses are given like tax subsidies so that they don't have to pay taxes for the first 4 years that they exist, you're getting significantly less tax dollars to supplement like the missing money, if that makes sense, just because of how Pennsylvania like designates their funds. Aside from even funding concerns, the ways in which the curriculums are developed is largely slanted towards instilling a love of capitalism, a love of white supremacy, a love of the patriarchy, a love of work and productivity that frowns upon individuality, self-care, creative expression. Ultimately, the K-12 school system is currently doing as it was designed to do. I feel like people have a really hard time understanding that. Like, they think it's some...
They think it's broken.
Yeah, it's broken. It's not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. So if you want to change it, you have to destroy the system as it exists and build a new one. Ultimately, though, that's not... It's doing as it was designed, which was to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. In an article titled "How Capitalism Undermines Progressive Education Reform" by Mike Strivers, he states, "The real purpose of schools, the hidden curriculum, is to prepare students for a life in an autocratic workplace. Schools serving wealthy families are more likely to prompt students to think creatively and systematically, and have them practice making prescriptions of what others should do. Schools that serve working class students tend to emphasize compliance to predetermined rules, deference to authority figures, and strict disciplinary codes, previewing the lack of agency and democracy that they will experience on the job." Contrary to reformers' claims that the school system was or could be the great equalizer, the history of public schools shows that that was never its intended function. Their goal in mid-19th century America was to socialize workers into a merging industrial capitalist economy. As George Boutwell, later Horace Mann's successor as the secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education, wrote, "The owner of the factories are more concerned than other classes and interests in the intelligence of their laborers. When the latter are well educated and the former are disposed to deal justly, controversies and strikes can never occur. Essentially, if you keep the population stupid and prideful in that ignorance, they can't rally together to overthrow these systems of oppression." Mm-hmm. We see this represented in the schools that serve working class students that are highlighted in the film, honestly, throughout. And the emphasis on compliance and like adhering to rules. So specifically in thinking of the song Nurse's Office, mm-hmm. Perfect attendance as a reward was designed as a way to create an unhealthy relationship with self-care and like going to school when you don't feel good or like you can, mm-hmm. because ultimately that's not something you're going to be provided when you're an adult and in an office or a working environment. So they train you to think that missing school is like a problem. That's why there's truancy courts. Like that should be illegal. I understand like kids need to learn and like get an education, but they're targeted at people who like literally like there's the areas within they reside are so disinvested that like that should not be allowed. Like you should not require like financial penalties for truancy. Mm-hmm. If like you actually care that students are learning, it's definitely more oriented so that people know that they can't take a day off. Like going to the nurse's office to like have a second to just breathe because you didn't feel like you wanted to go to school in the first place. You just wanted to go home. Like that's what the lyrics are in the song. And I used to do that. I didn't want to go home because I did not have a fun home life, but I spent lots of time in the nurse's office because I did not enjoy being in class either. So it's like, you don't have anywhere to go. But it's ultimately, like, these things are designed to produce and continue ignorance. So if you think about, like, half the population that are super racist, well, it's more than half, but, like, you know what I mean? Like, are just, like, for capitalism because they think they're going to get a slice of the pie. And, like, they promote just, like, more racism so that they don't join together in, like, class and, like, overthrow these systems. Like, it's all super intentional and gross. And that's ultimately, like, I used to work in schools. That's why I'm very anti-school at this point. I'm pro-education. I think kids need to learn stuff. But do the schools that exist currently provide that kind of knowledge and, like, happiness and path to success? Absolutely not. And they won't until things change, ultimately. Because it's not the great equalizer. It never was designed also, like, to be.
What are they teaching, right? Like, what are they not teaching? Like critical race theory. But it's also like the whole argument of like the school to prison pipeline, right? Like we're underfunding and there's no up-to-date textbooks. There's no way for young people to succeed in certain areas. And so then it just leaves them with very few options, which usually result in them being incarcerated in some form, usually for nothing. Honestly. And then once you're in because the systems we have are like that. It's all kinds of impression. And, I'm always thankful for your sections, Kat, because I do learn, because, like, I just don't ever think about, it just never occurred to me that schools are designed with this idea of, like, you conforming and, like, there's always, like, conforming and like you wear uniforms and you're like supposed to be what society says is the right way to be, and like growing up in the way that we did, like when you were different or you didn't cater to what they expected, then you were bullied or you suffered the consequences for that, even from like instructors. But to think of it as like workers, like breeding workers, is even more stressful or like equally stressful. And I think like there is a lot of that. We have to conform. This is BS. Like we shouldn't have to do this in the film, which I thought was really great. Like just thinking of like the not, like you have to ask, like she remarks like, I literally just asked to use the restroom. And the fact that like kids have to, like, that's crazy. But then you're like I've heard horror stories of workplaces that are like that. Like Wee Mojo was telling me she heard a story of a woman who was pregnant and she had morning sickness, and her boss was like, you keep going to use the restroom too often. And she was like, well, I'm pregnant and I get morning sickness. So they gave her a trash can. And they're like, you can't leave. You have to just vomit in this trash can at your desk, which is still disruptive and doesn't benefit her work at all. Or thinking of like Amazon workers who are peeing in bottles because they're being fined if they leave their post.
Yeah. No, it's honestly, it's so upsetting on so many different levels, because it's like, I didn't even really talk about the ways in which like the patriarchy are upheld in schools. The way like, if you're showing your shoulders or your skirt, you get sent home. Like,
yeah.
Like if you have a teacher who is creepy and should not be looking at young girls like in that way, that sounds like you should fire that teacher, not send that child home to change. Because ultimately they're all children. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so that's pedophilia. Like they all just are a problem ultimately at that end. It's just like a whole thing. Ooh. Uh-oh. Oh, we're back.
Oh, there you are.
I am. Sorry.
Okay.
But yeah, ultimately it's a whole problem where there's just so many layers to it, in which like all the things that are wrong with society are basically like upheld and like ingrained into people. Like even all history's taught, like all the textbooks are from Texas and they're manipulated.
We know what trash that is.
Yeah, they're manipulated by money, and basically like their school systems, textbooks, even if they're not updated, they're like inundated or like drenched in this like Christianity first, manifest destiny, this capitalism, you have the American dream, all the great things. Everyone wants to come here. Because it's so great. Everyone wants to come here, and we can't let everyone come here because, God, there's so much great stuff that happens. Yeah,
not
you know what I mean?
From the shithole countries.
Yeah, it's not like anyone wants to be here in the first place. Like, it's honestly wild. Like, the amount of just, like, kind of, it's not brainwashing because that doesn't exist, but, like, kind of, like, intentional manipulation and stupidity that is created through it. Just, like, through not teaching critical thinking skills, you know what I mean? Like, it's just really, it's all very intentionally done. So I think education's super important. People need that.
But the
schools,
right education.
And what's awful too is that people don't get paid enough that like they could send their kids to better schools. They aren't paid enough that they can stay home with their kids. You know what I mean? Like it's either work or die. So lots of people don't even have like the option to find a school that isn't terrible. That isn't like tell your kid to sit there until they pee themselves kind of energy. You know what I mean? So the world sucks.
Yeah.
Did you know? I'm blue today, so it's fun. It sucks, but it's a little fun.
Blue.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one of the interesting parts of this film is that it is really fun and beautiful on the outside, and then you like look and you're like, oh, wait a minute. And I think that makes it a more digestible and accessible medium, like for people to get the message, is through these fun songs. And it's like the best way to use your impact, right? is to educate in this like sly way. Like you don't even know you're being educated because you're just having fun, which is edutainment. Yeah. So Mallory Martinez, you're an edutainer like us.
Yeah. And I'm not saying like teachers suck. Like there's some teachers that do a really good job and make up for this horrible situation that they're in. There's some situations within school that can be really positive for students if they don't have a good home life, etc. Like that still exists and it still is true while there still exist problems. Essentially.
Yeah. And I think it's, like you were saying, it's working the way it's supposed to. And this, similarly to any other institutions that are in America, there are some good people who are trying to do the best that they can in those institutions. But when the institution itself is the problem, then you can only do so much. You can't fix it from the inside because it's not broken. You just have to redo it. And there's a lot of stuff we have to redo in this country. So, but I think, there's a lot of empowering messages in this film, and along with that, like, there are a lot of Gen Zs, like, kids who are working hard to fight back against, like, the patriarchy and gender norms and expectations, and are just over it. Like, they're over that. And I love that they are. Like, like, hearing more and more about, like, people going against dress codes, or fighting back against school if they're not allowed to attend the prom a certain way or with a certain person. Like, those things, like, seem small, but they were impossible for, like, me and, like, my friends. Like, I can't imagine us doing those things. Even to this day, like, I'm wearing this dress now, if you're watching, that my shoulders are out, and I always am like it's in recent years that I was like, I am allowed to show my shoulders. Like, like, I still feel like, oh no, my shoulders are out. What's gonna happen? Like, it took a lot of unlearning of what was expected of me and what was, like, ladylike or professional, and a lot of those things that you just have to like it is what it's professional if I'm a professional and I'm doing this. Like, like, if that's what it is, that's what professional looks like today. So yeah, I hope this film empowers people to stick it to the man and the institutions that are there to oppress us, but also to be entertained and have a good time, and know that, like, music can be a tool just as much as film can in, educating people on certain traumas and experiences that maybe they're not super knowledgeable in. Like I don't know about bulimia. I've never done it. But I feel like I got a really intense glimpse into it just from that song.
Like, empathy building, 100%. That it's, as you said, like, it's a place of understanding and not of critique. And I feel like the world exists often in a place of critique when understanding is necessary. So it does a really beautiful job doing that. And also, just, like, God bless the internet. There does a lot of scary things, but I feel like a lot of things change in a different way than they were able to in our generation. Like, we're still alive, so our generation still exists. But, like, when we were younger, we did not have, like, access to just strangers who will call a school board until they fire somebody. You know what I mean? Like, you can really do a lot of activism that exists in this current interweb world that's, like, really inspiring and, like, powerful. And honestly, it took me I'm 28 now to, like, kind of feel comfortable to, like, be what I want to be. And it's kind of cool that, like, kids through the internet are able to figure out that stuff so much younger.
Doing things like I never thought would have been possible. It never would have occurred to me at the age that Millie Martinez is to even say those things. So I'm very thankful for her. Look forward to what the future brings. Like, Olivia Rodrigo is doing some things too. Like, you young kids are doing it. I feel like a old lady. You youngins.
The youngins, they're really out here.
Snappers.
Yeah. Causing good trouble,
Yeah, good trouble, yes. Well, that's our episode for K through 12. I hope it was a pleasant surprise to see just, like, straight up visual album for our musicals episode. We have some more classic horror musicals coming up, and I hope you enjoy those as well. But remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and shoot us an email at theghouls@gmail.com, or
subscribe to our newsletter.
Tweet at us. Subscribe to our newsletter. Tweet at us, whatever. And let us know what you think about K through 12, or if you have any suggestions, recommendations of other horror music, like horrifying themes in songs or albums that are making statements. And pushing against norms. Because I'd love to expand my listening. Because right now it's mostly just like Korean R&B, and I can't tell you what they're saying because it's in a different language.
Yeah, I live for lyrics, so I would also be super excited to receive recommendations in that realm.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Always recommendations. And again, if you, Halsey, if you're out there, it's me, Gabe. I would love to watch your film.
Yes, please.
I think you're great. Honestly, genuinely. Love what you're doing out there. And want to see it. I want to see that hard work, the A24 level film that you made, because it looks so cool. It's like The Witch, but like Halsey.
I believe it. If you get access, I hope I also get to see it.
Yeah. Halsey. Well, with that being said, don't get married.
They'll eat your kids.
Or they'll be fine, but they'll go to school and they'll be sad.
Yeah. They'll be oppressed and then funneled into this like endless system of workforce and then just feel sad their whole lives. And like whenever they're not doing anything, feel like they're flawed as people because they're not being productive for 2 seconds, and don't know how to relax because it's just endless. Stay young, even though young sucks too, but like just stay.
Yeah, stay young, forever young. Well, that's like how you get overwhelmed by too many things going on. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm the opposite, where it's like if there's not a million things going on, like I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, why is there not more noise? Like I feel crazy because there's not I'm not focusing on 20 things.
Yeah.
I know that's like the opposite of what it should be, but I'm just like, there's only 2 things.
You'll get there, Gabe. You just gotta take the capitalism out of your box for like a second, and you'll get there. I promise.
Hopefully. All right. Well, down with the patriarchy and capitalism. Viva la revolution.
Yeah.
So that really silly revolution.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Jesus, kid.
You got puke right now? Oh, poor baby.
I think she's done.